Chapter 2. The Storm. There's a tempest in yon horned moon, there's lightning in yon cloud, and hark, the music, mariners, the wind is piping loud. Alan Cunningham. Our ship was now immediately immersed in a tumultuous ocean of ice masses, grinding and crushing around us on every side. "It is impossible to keep to the wind," said the first mate to the captain. "Let her go to the port and starboard anchors," he replied. This was done, and the loud rattle of chain cables announced that the anchors had plunged to the bottom of the sea. The backward drift of the ship ceased, and she was brought up. "She rides hard," said the captain, as the Albatross was tossed from side to side in fearful lurches. "The chains hold well," said the officer. "They are forged of the best Swedish iron. Their proof is 60 tons. A shade of doubt passed over the captain's face as, leaning over the railing, he watched the huge chains rising, falling, and clanking amidst the waves. "Hark!" he said. "The ring of the iron is crystalline. 100 tons won't hold her in this sea." Crash! Both chains snapped short at the ports, and reeling and staggering like some wild and wounded animal broke loose from its fastenings, the ship rapidly drifted sternwise towards the barrier. "Damn the chains!" growled the captain. "They snap like pipe stems. Hemp is better than iron around here. Let go the sheet iron anchor, and be spry about it. Blast my eyes, she's got a hemp cable on her, with a twist in it that'll hold a man o' war in a hurricane." Faithful and true old sheet anchor! How the last hope of the storm beat the mariner clugs to that crucial iron mass, fit symbol amidst the tempest of ocean, of that sacred cross to which the last hope of the Christian clings amid the storms of life. She springs from the cathead, dragging her huge cable through the port, and plunges beneath the waves. Her mighty flukes grapple the sea bottom and bury themselves to the shank. What a grip is that! The ship is brought up short, like a wild bull suddenly lassoed by the ranchero. In vain she plunges and leaps, straining and tugging at her tether, which holds her with the elastic tenacity of steel. "She rides easy," said the officer as the billows gathered in front, lifting the bows of the Albatross high on their foaming crests. "And there's music in twisted hemp, too," said the captain as the elastic vibrations of the great 20-inch cable poured forth a deep and mournful tone like the sound of an immense brass viola. "We'll weather it yet, captain, provided the anchor ground holds." There was a frightful burst of the storm, and the ice masses pouring forward with irresistible momentum forced the ship backward. "She drags," said the officer. "Damn the sea bottom," growled the captain. "It crumbles like rotten muck under the anchor's grip." Again the anchor bites, and the ship is brought up. Again she drags, and the ship drifts. Once more she bites, then drags, and bites again. The brave old anchor strove to her full office. She bit and tore the treacherous foundations of that marauding sea with many a furrow. Had the anchor ground been firm, she would have held her. But the overmastering sea still forced the ship backwards. The struggle was in vain. "Captain," said the first mate, "we're drifting on the ice barrier, and unless the steam can hold her off, she'll strike in 30 minutes. Crowd on more steam," replied the captain. The engines were put to their fullest power. Their throbbing shook the ship. For a short time she held her way. Suddenly a loud crash was heard at the stern. One of the engineers rushed up the companion ladder, his face pale as a corpse. "The propeller has broke loose," he said. At this terrible news, many of the crew uttered cries of despair, and all was in confusion. Some clung to the rigging, others stood with folded arms, calmly awaiting the dread summons to death, for the ship seemed doomed to destruction. At this awful moment, the captain's lion voice rose high above the din, penetrating every part of the ship. It was like the voice of some fearless spirit, whom no emergency could perplex nor terrors appall. "All hands! Every man to his station!" Anchors, cables, engines, and steam had been beaten in this contest with the elements, and human muscles and daring seamanship were now called upon to enter the lists. The inspiring tones of that voice shook off the paralysis of fear. The boatswain's shrill pipe echoed the call, and the officers and crew obeyed it. "Every man to his post! Prepare to war the ship!" The keen eye of the captain had described through the gloom a narrow cove or inlet penetrating the ice barrier about 2 furlongs off the starboard quarter, the entrance of which was faced by a stationary iceberg, and thereby screened from the storm, and he had determined to put the ship right about and run her into it. To war the ship, or veer a ship, in other words, to put her right about and on an opposite course under such a dangerous surrounding, is a maneuver of the most delicate kind. It requires great skill in seamanship, and the exercise of the utmost caution and circumspection on the part of captain and sailor. Every man must thoroughly understand his duties, and implicitly obey each order as it is given, or the ship may be swamped and sink to the bottom. The officers and crew quickly gathered around, awaiting their orders. "Lay aloft, and stand by to loose for the foretops. Clear away fore and storm stays," shouted Captain Anderson. The boatswain pipe sounded high and shrill. With a loud cheer the seamen ascended the slippery shrouds, grappling the ice-crusted spars, sails, and riggings. After a few minutes, "Already there aloft!" again shouted the captain. "Aye, aye, aye!" resounded the rigging like faint voices from the scurry storm clouds. Then turning to the deckhands, Man topsail sheets and halyards." The men stood ready. The captain again shouted to the riggers aloft, "Stand by! Let fall! Sheet home, and hoist away!" The boatswain's pipe echoed each order, which was obeyed to the letter. The sails cleared, the riggers swiftly descended to the deck. As the sails filled with the wind, the bolt ropes, clews, and reef bands creaked with the strain, and the sheets flapped as if they would tear to ribbons. The captain now called to the seamen in charge of the anchors. "Slip cable!" "Aye, aye!" resounded the hold. The 2 strokes from the sharp axe, the great cable was severed in twain, rushed through the hawse pipe with a loud whiz, coiled and writhed in the air like an immense serpent, then sank beneath the waves. Released from her tether, the ship for a moment staggered to and fro, helpless. "Up helm!" shouted the captain. The steersman put the helm hard up. As the ship veered about, she fell into the trough of the sea, careening almost to her beam ends, the waves breaching over her, but the storm sails paid her head off, and she righted, trembling from keel to topmast. "Square yards! Right helm! Make for the inlet!" again shouted the captain, and like a hound loosed from her leash, the ship sped swiftly towards the cove, the billows and the ice masses dashing against her from behind. It seemed as if her stern would be torn to pieces. The captain had discovered a current skirting the foot of the barrier and running into a narrow defile between the ice cliffs and communicating with the cove. It was scarce a ship's length across, was filled with surf, ran with great velocity, and terrible as was the alternative, he determined to plunge the ship into it. The crew were astonished at his courage and hardihood, but it was the only chance for the ship. The roaring sea flung its mighty billows to the summits of the cliffs, and louder still resounded the thundering cavalcade of the ice masses. As uplifted by the waves, they were hurled like battering rams against the upright wall of that awful barrier that loomed up between the sea and sky. It seemed as if the death knell of the doomed ship was sounding. "Hard a port helm!" shouted the captain. Down rushed the ship into the gorge, reeling from side to side, her yards almost grazing the ice walls, the billows breaching over her deck, the spray hissing around her, then veered about, staggered into the cove, shuddering like a weary and wounded bird escaped from the fangs of some beast of prey. "Well done, my brave old sea-bird," said the captain, as leaning over the prow, he patted and stroked the scarred and weather-beaten figurehead of the albatross, one of whose wings was walked off in the dread struggle.